Hello and welcome everyone to today's discussion, Rejected, Emotional and Practical Tips to Move Forward. This is the latest in our series, Business Bootcamps for Writers, brought to you by the Authors Guild Foundation with support from the National Endowment for the Arts, Penguin Random House, and our donors. The series has looked at some nitty-gritty details on being a writer, things like finding an agent, running a DIY marketing campaign. This should be a fun talk today. We invite you to check out authorsguild.org if you're not a member to learn about what we do and to look at other business bootcamps events and other free public programming from the Authors Guild Foundation. So of course, writing is a business and an art, and moving past rejection is as critical a skill as any other. Today, we're here to learn from two writers who have published widely in many genres. Bonnie Friedman is the author of 3 books of creative nonfiction, including the best-selling and widely excerpted Writing Past Dark, currently in its 28th printing. It was recently named by the Center for Fiction as one of the 11 essential books for writing and one of the best books for writers by poets and writers. Her essays have appeared in Plowshares, Agni, LitHub, New York Times, and have 4 times been selected as notable in Best American Essays. Terese Svoboda is the author of 19 books across literary genres. She's won the Guggenheim, a Bob's Prize in Fiction, the Iowa Poetry Prize, an NEH Translation Grant, the Grey Wolf Nonfiction Prize, the Jerome Foundation Video Prize, and a Pushcart Prize for the essay. She's a 3-time winner of the New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, and she's been awarded residencies at Headlands, James Merrill, Yaddo, McDowell, Bellagio, and she has 2 books of fiction forthcoming. So that said, Bonnie and Terese, thank you for joining us. Thanks to everyone in the audience, and feel free to use the Q&A box below if you have questions for us. You two have wonderful resumes, but we're here to talk about rejection. So I was wondering if you could start things off by telling us maybe a personal experience with rejection that stands out to you. Bonnie?
Okay, that's great. So, what I've been thinking about was I've had an experience of rejection that I think is very, very common, which is that I had an essay turned down by small public, small literary journals, and then accepted by a major literary journal, and then went on to, win notable essay and special mention in the Pushcart prizes. And so I think that that's a very ordinary experience for writers to have, which is why it's so important to learn how to get beyond a feeling of defeat around rejection, because I think there are many, many writers that share that experience of having a piece turned down, and maybe they revise it, maybe they don't, and then a place that they want even more to accept their piece does accept it. So that's one experience I had for rejection. And I remember every time that piece came back, it was turned down by the New York Times, but it was turned down by a lot of small places too. I always felt abysmal, and then was in a state of shock when Plowshares took it. So I don't know, Terese, what about you? What kind of experience have you had around that?
Well, it took me 15 years of submissions to get my first novel published. 17 years of applying for the Guggenheim, and I changed genres in the middle of that. I had 40 years and ongoing applying for an NEA grant. I won an O. Henry for a story in a certain magazine, which then sent me a regular unsigned rejection slip after my next submission. I have 2 forthcoming novels. Yes, I'm very happy about that. One written 30 years ago, with 43 rejections, not including countless contests. The other one was written 10 years ago, rejected only 34 times with countless contest submissions. Let's see, I think I've had 3 books out of the 19 placed by an agent. I've published in my 19 books with 15 presses, so each time I have to start over. And I'm from a town in Nebraska of 5,000, so I had no connections whatsoever, only naivete, which I don't have anymore.
And so tell me, what are we to learn from this experience? I mean, it's very eloquent. It's really extraordinary. The amount of grit you have comes across is one aspect.
Well, it's one of the things that I do is every time I get rejected, I reread the piece, usually out loud. And that causes me to rewrite it. A piece can always be recast, and as time goes forward, you see things about it you hadn't seen in that first initial exuberant submission. And I think that rejection is a kind of a form of editing for me.
Right. When I think about rejection, one of the things I think about, I heard this and I've learned it to be true, which is that it means that the piece, for me, it means that the piece has not found its correct home when a piece is turned down. And I say this both as a person who's been an editor of a literary journal, who sees, how pieces are judged, but also I recall reading an editor of a literary journal saying that he tends to choose pieces that answer a question that he has in his life. And it was so helpful to hear that, because I realized, okay, the essay that I wrote about why, the Jewish girls I grew up with in the Bronx who didn't have children and why didn't we have children, that might not be answering a question that he has in his life. And that's a good way to realize, why is it that that when you're looking for a home for a piece, it's really going to resonate with some readers more than others, and with some editors more than others. Another way that I think about it is when you go to a party, there are certain people at the party who are going to be on your wavelength, who you're going to be attracted to, and you're going to want to talk to them, and they're going to get what you're saying, and it's going to be important to them. And then there are other people that it just, you're going to speak to them and just going to get a complete, it's a blank look. It isn't essential to them. And I think now that we have more women, especially editing, we can see the effect of that, because, years ago, I remember opening the New Yorker over and over and seeing so many more men than women being published, and the Vita statistics came out about that. And you can imagine if you didn't have that context and you just received a rejection, if you were a woman and you didn't realize your chances were so much more slight than a man's, just statistically, it would be hurtful. So I think thinking about it in terms of finding the right home for a piece is useful. What would you say about that?
Well, I think there are three types of rejection. The first type is the writing, if the writing isn't quite up to snuff, which sometimes takes a while to refocus. The second would be subject matter, if it's something that someone really just isn't interested in, or it's inappropriate for whatever it is they're turning out. And the third is taste, which some of us consider whimsy with regard to editors. So, and what they had for breakfast. I think that between those three, you will find your piece just needs to move on. I mean, I have had poems that were rejected, and then I foolishly resubmitted one that then they took. So it was another day.
It was another day. And I remember about that, I remember hearing the old poetry editor at the New Yorker, Alice Quinn, saying that it took several batches of poems submitted by a poet for her to get the sense of what their voice was, what their agenda was, and then she could contextualize them. So in a way, it makes sense to me that a poem resubmitted to an editor who has gotten to know you a bit, has a greater chance of being accepted. One of the things that I'm aware of is that relationship helps too in getting published. So my first publication in a literary journal was a place that I submitted. I decided I was going to get known by them. But I lined up 6 different pieces that I was going to submit one after another to this journal. And the 4th piece was accepted. And the editor did get to know me. And by years later, I ran into her and she remembered me. She remembered the piece. So there is something to, having people get acquainted with you, which I think is useful.
Yeah, the adage is, if you get rejected 4 times by the same editor, then you should stop trying to submit. And I never believed that. I mean, I tried to get in, I had a poem accepted, I don't know, I was like 20 years old, in Poetry Magazine. And then I didn't have another poem accepted for 25 years. And but I kept submitting. I don't know, maybe that's foolishness. Maybe it's hitting your head against a wall. We're getting to the perverse issues with regard to this later, right? Well, anyway.
What do you think enabled you to keep submitting to a place that didn't yet accept your work?
Well, I kept reading the magazine, and it seemed to me that I had poems that fit the magazine, and they just couldn't see it. So sometimes, though, when I finish something, I'm so enthusiastic, I think it's brilliant, and I send it off to the top of my list. And that's probably not the best approach, because it takes me a while before it settles. I should probably send it to the middle of the list, but I don't know, I make various mistakes depending on my enthusiasms. I think I send out about 50 submissions a year, and I get 5 acceptances. So I don't know if that's average or what, but I've been around for a while, and it has never changed.
You are such an inspiration, because I think most mortals would not, I certainly wouldn't have the internal fortitude to submit 50 times. I think that's really great in a year.
To me, it's part of the process of writing. Sending it, getting away from my desk, and then having it come in again is well, as I said, it helps shape the work. It makes me think as if I, first of all, exposed the work to someone else. Someone else had to read it. And it's just the same reason why I also continue to send to contests, is that you may get another fan, or someone else would suddenly recognize your work. And, they say you have to have your name in lights 9 times before someone will do something about it. Like, for example, buy your book. It's part of the process.
That's so useful to hear that you view it that way. Do you get comments? You say that you revise your work when you get it back. Is this on the basis of comments that you've received, or do you do it even if you haven't received comments?
I don't know that anybody receives comments anymore. I mean, I never do. No, it's just, I look at it, I see there's a verb tense that's screwed up, and or a pronoun, or I better recast that whole scene. Whatever it is, suddenly appears glaringly that an improvement could be made. There is an anecdote about potters. 2 sets of potters in a college were given the task of half of them only making their very best work at the end to submit. And the other half were supposed to make as many pots as possible and then submit. And it turned out that the ones that made as many as possible made the best pots. And somehow it seems to me that if you're sitting there, even if they're ugly and ragged, that you might learn faster than always trying to turn out something perfect.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. There's a lot of wisdom in that. I think about what is the meaning of a piece being rejected or passed on. How do we interpret that? And when I think about my own experience of it, just the sense of defeat, the wretchedness, the sadness, my mind jumps to, I'm not a good writer, I'm a bad writer. And what's interesting to me is that thought exists no matter how many years I've been published, no matter how many publications I have. Every time I get an acceptance, I have this euphoria, and I think I'm exempt now. I'm never going to be rejected again. And then, so I'm sort of like shocked then when the rejection comes. And what I have found works for me is for me, I'm like many writers, I just need to get the piece out again. Sometimes I rewrite it, and sometimes I just look for a different place that might be a better home, or submit it to more places than one. But what I wanted to get at was that taking action, one no longer is submitting or a victim or passive. There's something about being judged that we tend to globalize rather than just contextualize what that rejection meant. But for me, I think for you, the taking action is rewriting. For
Yes.
me, taking action is sending it out again or beginning a new piece. But teaching. One thing that I've found is that teaching, even if it was a little workshop in my own home, puts me in touch with a sense of agency. And I think as writers, one of our jobs is to caretake our writing spirit. And so we have an obligation, just as if it's a separate child that needs to be taken care of, and we have to look out for it. And so I think it's important for all of us to think about, what are the things after you feel defeated or low? What are the things that help you get back in the saddle again? And, I think it's almost as if the two emotions can't exist at the same time, the sense of defeat and the sense of hope. And so the sooner you could get back to that sense of hope, the more writing you'll get to do and the more you'll get work out in the world. I think very much about like what are the stories that we tell ourselves when a piece comes back? And I'll just say, do you want to speak to that?
Well, a little bit. I think this year says I'm a genius and I can't wait to hear what I know. And this year says I'm an idiot and everything I write is shit. And this part in the middle is the part that manufactures, sends it out. So it's, I think that's human nature to some extent. I have to say, when I finally, after all those years of applying, I got a Guggenheim in fiction, not in poetry, which is what I started trying to get. I assumed that the way would be clear and open. Everyone would then bow down and we would find it easier to get acceptance. But unfortunately, that was not true. And then you also spoke about how, well, I can't remember exactly what it was, but how you turn to something else. And I have had the experience of changing from being a poet to a fiction writer and later on a nonfiction writer, thinking that another genre, that's the one that they'll accept me finally. I've just been writing in the wrong genre. And of course, then you discover that the problems in another genre are just as great as the one you left behind. I don't seem to ever learn that, but
you know what I wanted to say? It seems like to me, as if the way I view it myself is as if there's a great big on-off switch. And when I get a rejection, it pushes that switch to off. And then I can feel very terrible. And it's extremely wasteful because what it often means is one of the things you were saying, it's time to rewrite it, or it just wasn't the right home for that piece.
well,
So, for me, it's important to find some way to push the switch back into the on mode, which gets me connected with the world of inner significance again, rather than there's something about that outward facing rejection that that cuts off that connection. So for me, there's something about how can I push that switch that's been off back to on? And I think that these stories about the number of rejections that other writers have had are very helpful. And to know also how many writers that we now admire, usually self-published, most of the great 20th century masters.
I once had a story accepted by the New Yorker. But I didn't get a contract. They said I had to go in and have an interview and see if they could work with me. So I went to the old office and I sat there and I said, of course, yes, I can make those changes. And I was so nervous when I lifted my hand from the chair, I peeled the veneer off. I had 2 hands full of veneer. And then, so I went home, I made the changes, I put it in the mail, and I waited 6 weeks. And you were never supposed to call the New Yorker and contact the editor. It was verboten. That was sure death. But I did. They hadn't received it. So I had to go home and print it out again. And I delivered it to the receptionist this time. and then they rejected it. So the truth is that nothing is ever sure. Even, I mean, they've never liked anything I've written since then, and that was many years ago.
You know, I wanted to pick up on something that you're saying. Nothing is ever sure. Nothing is ever sure in the outside world. We are subject to taste, whims, changes of editors. Somebody you have a relationship with then moves on. The public's tastes change. There's nothing, but it isn't true that nothing is sure in the inner world. That's what we have control over. The connection to our own, inspiration, writing material. And it just seems to me that there must be a way to feel towards those inner inspirations the way we feel towards the people that we love. It doesn't really matter if somebody else can see, the handsomeness of my husband or the gorgeousness of my cat. I see them always. And I feel like there's something that we as writers have to cultivate as a spiritual practice so that whether an agent rejects a piece, whether doesn't like a project, that we must maintain our connection, our faith in it. That's the part that we can control. And ultimately, what are we doing this for? I mean, I think writing is so hard. We ultimately must be doing it for ourselves, because there's just, even those of us who find it, I myself don't enjoy writing. I enjoy moments of it. It is the most meaningful thing I do, but it's not a fun thing I do. But I do think it's interesting to think about, well, what parts of this whole experience can we control?
Very good. Yes, it's the dopamine rush you get when you disappear into time, trying to edit something. I mean, nothing else does that unless maybe you're a long distance runner, or I don't know, there are a few other things, but it's total absorption. I always object to the idea that people shelve their work. I think it should be considered resting the work. You've wrestled all those words into some kind of order, and it's not shelved, it's just resting and awaiting another look.
I think it's such a good point, because haven't we both had that experience that we grow and become different people? And then when we read the piece over, we can see something, what I think it happens a lot, that we receive a piece of a critique that we might even know is highly intelligent and really useful, but we can't make use of it. We haven't grown into an understanding of how to use it. And so I think that there is something really great about this concept of yours of letting it rest while our understanding grows.
You go off for a walk, if nothing else, or look into the refrigerator where, true inspiration lies. And suddenly you find the solution to that sentence, if not the book.
Or I've had it happen that an essay that I haven't looked at in 3 or 4 years, I go back to it and I see, it becomes obvious what the missing piece is, or where I've gone on too long, or how now I get, oh my God, it started with a scene and then it's a huge amount of exposition. And I could not see that at the time, which goes to the point you were making about trying to make the perfect pot versus making 100 of them. And you're, constantly in dialogue and learning the form even better.
So I don't mind talking about rejection. I hate talking about successes. You were going to address that and envy, I think, in particular.
I was going to address envy, and I just wanted to start off, I've been thinking about envy for a long time. My first book, the lead essay was about envy. And I think that the problem has gotten much worse in recent times. When I was coming of age, I might read a review in the New York Times on the way to work, but then I was done with it. I would set it aside. And the world we're living in now, there are continual occasions to feel envy. We could, all day long, we can be on on Facebook, on LitHub. So there's all this. So it's even worse than it was. I just wanted to tell a little anecdote. I've written about this, but I find it useful to remind me of how envy works. it used to be when I was first starting out as a writer, I was working on a novel, and sometimes I would feel really good after the morning of writing. And then on the way to my job in the afternoon, I always stopped in at a certain bookstore that I passed along the way. I would feel this like huge desire to go in and find out what did other contemporaries, what were they working on? It was as if I needed this information. And I would go to the brand new books and I would find a new book, and I would, flip around until I found one that induced envy. And by the time I left that bookstore, I would feel numb and empty and hollowed out. And then I would continue to my afternoon job. So, I didn't notice this till a therapist asked if I always did it. And the answer was yes, it seemed reasonable to me at the time. But in retrospect, what I've come to understand about envy is that it's a perverse, for me, it was masochism.
Yeah.
It always feels like it takes two to envy, but it really only takes one. I was seeking out things that inspired envy.
Well,
And-
with social media these days, the phrase used to be New York is a city of envy, but now everybody's got New York.
That's well put.
Hmm.
I was going to say, and then you could talk about this, what I finally realized myself, why did, and I would say to the audience to think about to become aware of what are the activities that you engage in that make you feel bad. It's hard to notice them because they're counterintuitive. Our whole American mythology is we go from homeless to Harvard, from fat to thin. Like we always think we're progressing. And so it's hard to notice the things that pull us in the opposite direction, the perverse behaviors we engage in. I'll just say, it took me a while to figure out why was I doing this. And one reason was it returned me to my station in the family, which was a lower down station. So I felt close to those people, my people. And then secondly, I'm forgetting it. It must be so true. It will come back to me later. The other, I know. When I felt wonderful, I felt unreal. And so I felt fraudulent.
Oh, yeah.
And so this sort of it's sort of intimate self-cutting, painful behavior, it actually grounded me. And I felt, okay, this is Bonnie Friedman. So even though we think we want to change, sometimes there are things in our own lives. Like I know somebody submitted a question that before she always thinks before she sits down to write, why would anybody want to know what I have to say? I'm not famous. And that's that kind of a thought. I don't know if you have any perverse behaviors like that, Terese.
No, I just, I think success in my growing up was always associated with punishment. We were not to outdo either the siblings or our parents, and that was very important. So so I yearn for it, but it's painful.
For attention. I think a lot of writers are that way, which is why we become writers. I think, I think that if we could be our truest selves with other people, we might not need to be writing things down. But to me, the page is an ear that is always listening, and it helps me figure things out that I think others might be able to figure out, in social life. What I wanted to say, it helped me. A friend, he ascribed this to the Buddha. I don't know that the Buddha actually said this, but comparison is madness. And I think with envy, that helps a very great deal to realize comparison is madness, that you think this other person's life and how happy they are, how good they feel about the book they've written, the joy it gives them, and you don't know any of that.
That's true. But thank God, once you publish a book, it seems to be separate from yourself. Not so much as a child, but as an entity which someone else wrote, and you're just kind of standing back and hoping that someone else notices that's crying out and will pick it up.
Right. And I think I have felt like, we have to be cheerleaders for our work and, throw at a party.
Yes.
Push it forward a little bit, I think you know, hope that, you know, the other thing that I've noticed is I tend to feel invisible, and I'm always surprised at the number of people that might have noticed a piece. You know, once a piece is written, it's as if I've never written it at all. It just seems to vanish into the ether.
Oh, you're no longer responsible for those tenses and the fact that you got the city wrong in the second chapter. Someone else did that.
I like that. I tend to write the same thing over again. For instance, you know, what I was just writing about envy, being an essayist, I like to revisit experiences because each time I go and look at it, I can understand something more deeply. So, you know, when I first wrote about the experience of stopping into the bookstore of envy, which is just so weird. Why would a person do that? I've since had a number of people tell me that they did similar things. And I think nowadays the equivalent of it might be going to certain websites where you think, oh, I just want to get some information, but there's some dark energy that's stirring within you that is looking for to be gratified. Weird, sorry.
Yes. So we take questions now?
Oh, that was me. That was somebody calling me. Oh, with her, Johnny. Yes.
Sure. Let's move on to questions. So let's see here. First, let's talk about getting feedback and incorporating feedback. So you may feel that you're not sure whether you should take the advice that you're getting when you do get feedback from an agent or editor. How do you vet the feedback that you get to determine whether you should apply it?
I had a book that I had the copy editor attach a note to her notes saying that the editor told her to take out everything that was slightly poetic, which, since the book was only 150 pages long, wasn't going to let me have more than 30 pages. And my agent went back to the editor and said, "This, you accepted this, we have a contract, you can't do that." So that's the only case in my experience that I absolutely rejected the comment. And I don't know what I would have done if I had just had without that note from the copy editor.
You know, I take edits, especially copy edits, unless I feel like they're just, you know, killing the spirit of the piece. And sometimes you get edits back that make you feel like, if I have to accept that, I would have wished I never wrote the piece in the first place. It just goes to something so essential that I cannot accept it. And then I'll make my case.
Yeah,
why
that's
not.
Case. But you don't usually get that kind of in-depth critique unless the piece has already been accepted, either a story, an essay, or whatever. You don't get it attached to a rejection.
You're absolutely right. You don't.
There is a wiki, this hilarious wiki online called Rejection Wiki, which will show you the levels of rejections, automated rejections that you can get unsubmittable, and so you can see where you are in the tier, whether you're encouraged or not. I thought that was interesting.
So where do the two of you like to get critiques from? You know, if you're not a student, you're not in the MFA environment, do you have friends and other writers that you send around work with?
As you get older, it seems to me harder to get critiques. And I think the beautifully wrought pieces that come out of MFA's programs, competing with someone who has several books has a real advantage, because it's hard to get a group together, which I've been in many, that has the caliber and the interest to give you, the kind of critique that you need.
Yeah, I have a few writer friends that I share my work with, and what's interesting is over the years I've learned as much about their tastes as they've learned about my writing. So I know I have a certain friend that is very grounded in the world, and I know that she can help me if I'm getting just too abstract to help, to help locate me. And so there's different people give a different kind of reading, I have found. And some people are just sourpusses, and one has to learn which ones those are too.
Yeah, so that's really anybody who's finishing an MFA program should hustle their classmates, if nothing else, to try to stay in touch and to form some kind of group. I mean, it's great to have writer friends to look at it, but it's also a group dynamic is you can weigh one against the other.
What are your thoughts on when to give up on a specific project?
I don't give up very often. I have one manuscript I am giving up on because it was culturally, it didn't make sense any longer. But otherwise, I go back and continue to fool with things. My very best poem took like 10 years of fooling around with it. So I'm not a good person to ask. Bonnie.
I rarely have given up on something. I don't even think in those terms. I'll just feel like it's not ready yet. It's not done yet. I think there was one piece that I knew I gave up on when it got a critique that I was just sort of was like a cannonball going through the middle of it. And so I thought, okay, I actually could fix it, but I don't have the heart to anymore. But I'm like you, Terese, I tend not to give up on pieces. That said, it is hard, especially if you put years into writing something, to not, to have it, not yet found its home. That's true. But I'm like Terese, I don't tend to think about giving up on it.
Well, but whatever spark made you actually sit down and in front of your computer and spend time doing this fruitless endeavor is something that you have to rediscover every time in a revision. And sometimes it's gone and you don't know, it was written by somebody else and you can't remember what happened there. But most of the time, that spark of inspiration, if I can't get it to work in something, I'll just do something else and kind of surround the inspiration. And eventually something comes of it because it has to be persistent.
It has to be persistent. That's great.
Yeah, because I had something that started as a poem. I turned it into, and it was unsuccessful. I turned it into a story. It was okay. And I turned it into novella. It was really coming along. And then I finally published a novel. So it was Trailer Girl, which was really novella length, but they stuck some stories on. So that was just something I had to write.
A few people have expressed that they're frustrated because the agent has already shopped the piece to a dozen or 24 publishers. So they've already been to several agents. We don't want to keep going to different agents at the same agency. So there's just a sort of a numbers game where they feel like they have to walk away from something eventually. Others seem to be looking at like a hierarchy, like their wish list of the best publishers, and then they go to smaller publishers after that. Do you think that there's like a hierarchy of submitting to the biggest publishers and then smaller ones, or is it more about finding the right home, finding someone who's published similar works, or another factor like that?
Would you want to answer, Terese, before I do?
Okay, so well, the agent always wants to start off with the big places because they're the ones who are going to show up with the most money. And in my experience, I've had 6 agents so far, and that's their tack. And no one, the big houses never want it. And so we progressed to the smaller houses. And then but the smaller, more independent places are more idiosyncratic. So you have to know, exactly who to send it to. And then, contests. I've won a few contests in my time. I continue to submit to those. So you do run out of presses, but they're always popping up. And when they do pop up, you assume that they're always for young MFA people, but you never know. They might want somebody who's been around the block to make their efforts look legitimate. I don't know. It's it's a kaleidoscope of possibility. Just keep thinking about it like that, because as we all know, the publishing business has changed in the last 30 years and opportunities have changed. I don't know really whether or not they've narrowed in a literal sense, but it feels like that.
Mhm.
Bonnie?
Oh, I don't
Yeah,
have,
so
I don't have much to add to that. Although, I've noticed in friends' careers, some of them will want to be published in a small press and others seem not to. So they, wait off on publishing even a first book because they can't get, it's not accepted by a larger house. That aspect is difficult and has changed, I think. I don't really have an answer to that question though.
Can either of you speak to the idea of submitting short stories or excerpts of a longer work to contests or magazines with the expectation that it would help get the longer work published? Is that something you found to be the case?
My sense is it does help get the longer work published. It shows agents and editors that, I had my first editor at HarperCollins said to me, "We editors are sheep." And what she meant by that was that if somebody else accepted it, then she's more inclined to accept it. By sheep, she just means she's a human being. I mean, so I think, yes, having acceptances, having pieces acceptance, that gives you something to put into the query letter. And I think it does help show that your work is of a professional caliber and that somebody else invested in it and found an audience for it. So I think definitely, my sense.
Yeah, and somebody else read your work. That's a great honor, really.
My first book, I had, I think one of the pieces in it had been published. It was maybe two. So I think it really, and agents wrote to me when that first piece came out. So I think that really people should do that.
Almost every story in my short story collections and every poem in my poetry collections have been published. So that's my experience.
And with my book, my most recent book of essays, I would say 2/3 of them had been published already. And I think it made it much easier to find a publisher.
I've gotten a few specific questions. If you don't have a specific answer, that's fine. But someone asked if someone rejects your work, but asks to see more, but you don't have their name, it just came from the organization. How do you approach them? Or do you just go to the New Yorker office to hand deliver it?
Well, if they want to see more work, you should probably have some to send.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's
There was some essay that I recently read called "Submit Like a Man," which was I think by somebody who had I don't know if she was an editor at Tin House, and she was talking about how when women get a note, please send me more work, they might wait half a year to send another piece, whereas guys will do it immediately. And her point was that's much better because the editor doesn't remember you half a year later. So I think even if you don't have a name, I mean, that puts Terese was talking about those tiers of acceptance or rejection. And one of them is they give you the initials. One is they give you their name. One is it's just, send more work apparently, but without me even telling you who I am. But I would acknowledge, I would say you requested, thank you so much for your interest. I'm submitting this because you requested to see more work, and I'm so happy that you did. Hope you like this one.
So there's also an actual website called rejection.com, and it has a list of famous rejections, Gone with the Wind and Great Gatsby, and I don't know what else, most of them. And they actually will do a live rejection for you if you need that experience, among many other important rejection experiences.
I'm thinking, I'm noticing in the chat that somebody was asking for practical tips for moving forward. And I think that, I would say that for me, a practical tip for moving forward is getting the piece out. That's very practical. It is both emotional and practical, submitting the piece to somebody else. I've had, if an agent rejects a piece, I send it to one or two more agents. If, Therese's, reworks it. But to me, that's very practical. And when I talk about noticing the things that make you feel good as a writer, that to me, these things are extremely practical, because this is about the emotional side of the writing life, to get you reattached to your good feeling and your feeling of being empowered, which allows you to write more and allows you to send your work out. So for me, this whole topic is an interaction between the emotional and the practical. I think for each person, what's actually practical might be somewhat different. I think it's very practical to hear Terese say how often she submitted a piece and the different genres. It might be for some audience members, if you could, to think about how can I translate that into something that's practical for me. But to me, it's both inspiring and very practical to be able to contextualize this experience. Here you have a writer who's extremely successful, who's also been rejected constantly. And that to me is typical of most writers' lives. I think we tend to assume there are these exalted few who don't have this experience. But somebody had written, like, what does a writer like Terese Svoboda or Bonnie Friedman have to say? Why were they chosen to talk about this, considering they're so well published? And I would love to address that, because what you see is a curated persona, as is true of everything on screen, as is true of a million things. You're seeing a curated persona. If you're my friend, then you know the non-curated persona, or what I look like, but both of us have been rejected constantly. I mean, and the reason why we have so many successes is that we kept on going. And to me, that's extremely practical. I don't know what you would say about this, Terese, because I was stimulated by that comment, because I thought there's something really accurate that she's saying. Maybe this is just chit chat. Is this just literary chit chat, or are we delivering on what we said we were going to deliver on?
Well, if you had somebody up here who had been rejected all the time, I don't know what advice they could give. I mean, the idea is acceptance. So if they had picked two people who had never had any experience with rejection, that would be a totally different thing. I was thinking about one of the comments about that it's just a dartboard in sending in your manuscripts through contests and so forth. And I disagree with that. I think you should do a lot of research. You should see what kind of books that the publisher is interested in publishing and get an idea of their taste. And, Amazon still lets you look at a couple of pages and figure out whether or not your manuscript has any bearing on what they might like. That's not to say that when you sit down to write, you should pay any attention to that, because that's useless. I write for myself.
The point, here's another point that I do think is a practical tip. I think researching the journals that you're submitting to is very important. When I think about a piece that I wrote, that I sent to the Writers Chronicle, and they turned it down. And I was so depressed by that I threw it in the trash. I was walking to teach. I was teaching at NYU at the time. I passed this trash can, and I thought, why should I even be teaching at NYU? This, oh my God, so stupid. And then it was the same piece was accepted by Image Journal. Well, actually, if I'd looked at the Writers Chronicle, I would have seen that they don't publish pieces like the one I wrote. And if I'd studied Image, I would see they do publish pieces like the one I wrote. So I do think you're right about studying. They always say that. They always say, study the journal, but that always seems so boring that I think.
They always say we're open to anything, which is not true.
I heard something from the writer Justin Taylor. He told me people mistake the lack of something for the need of something. So you think, I love that magazine, and they don't publish pieces quite like mine. Say you're a sci-fi writer, you write a speculative fiction piece, but they do robots and vampires. they're not going to want your piece. They don't publish pieces like it because that's not what they publish, not because they're failing to.
They know their audience. Their audience wants that.
So did the two of you use any particular tools to be very practical? I mean, do you use Duotrope or some other websites to find places to submit? Do you keep spreadsheets of where you have pieces out and track the time and things like that?
Well, thank God for Submittable is all I have to say, because I have several places that I send outside of Submittable, and I'm always getting them confused. That it's really great. What do you do, Bonnie?
I remember when I was first starting, I had an index box file. I'm still very old school. I have a notebook in which I write down where I've submitted to. I tried, as I said earlier, I tried to create a relationship with an editor. I try to write back to, get to know who the editors are. I tend to submit to places where I have a sense of their taste. Each place has its own taste. They have different editors and different tastes. So I don't remember the question, but I'm very aware when I'm submitting and I subscribe to journals. I know we're supposed to do that, but I actually do it because it's extremely helpful to see what are other people writing. It's inspiring to see what other people are writing. What contemporary stuff is being taken. Extremely useful. Extremely useful.
No, it's useful in revisioning what you're doing too. We writers are all thieves, and it's nothing like seeing something you've never seen before that can really spur you to a different kind of rewrite.
I would have to say, I wanted another thing about envy. So I was talking about the bookstore of envy. There was about a decade I did not go into a bookstore because I couldn't afford the emotional cost that it was to me. But then at a certain point, it became clear that if I was going to write contemporary fiction, I'm living nowadays, so that's all I can write. For me, I needed to educate myself about what contemporary fiction writers were doing. And so I found that for me, it was possible to read on the treadmill. And so I would do my writing in the morning, do work, and then in the evening, go on the treadmill. And for some reason, reading contemporary fiction on the treadmill was really useful for me. It gave me a certain lightness, like it was just like, oh, the treadmill. And then I would be reading with a pen and a crayon, and then I would go to a bar and sit and read, and then I'd read at home. But I did not read anything that might inspire envy in the morning. But I acclimated myself, and it really changed me. And somebody had asked, has envy ever turned to admiration? And that certainly happened for me. Writers I envied, I ended up feeling grateful to, and I never believed that would happen. I had a therapist who I once asked, what does envy turn into? And does envy turn into anything? And she said, gratitude. And I thought, never in a million years. But I'm here to say that I did experience that. With Emma Klein, reading The Girls, many contemporary novelists, Maggie Nelson, her essays, real gratitude, people that I used to envy. So there's something about acclimating that helped me.
Yes. Agreed.
Someone says, writing makes me feel good, but submitting the work, marketing myself, makes me feel bad. How do you translate the love of writing into, your actual proposals and query letters and things like that? Do you have tips for someone who's not maybe comfortable with the proposal process, so the submission process?
Writing is work. Even the romance novel that you may not respect in terms of style, look at all those words in a row arranged in logical sequences. It's amazing, and it's work. And some things, in order to get to the work that you want to be doing or that is more enjoyable, you have to fight your way through the thicket like any other job and do the work. There's no short way around it. I don't like writing proposals either. I certainly don't like writing synopsis and things like that. It kills the work. So, but sometimes you have to do it, and almost always I've learned something from it. You know, being forced to think about creative work in a under a different lens can produce. You can suddenly discover the protagonist is all wrong. I don't know. What do you think, Bonnie?
I like the point that you're making, that you don't like to do it. I think none of us like to do it. I like the point that you just, it's something that must be done so that you could serve your work. You're the handmaiden of your work. You want to get your work out in the world. And I too don't like it. I would say that it helps me to think, and there are many things in life that are like this. It's more like a military campaign than it is success and failure. So that you think, oh my God, this is, it's not working. Well, it's not working yet. But every time you get feedback from, an agent, even if it's that they didn't even respond, it means that the piece isn't right for them, or it's not strong enough yet. You need to learn more. We live in a very information-rich environment to learn more about how you can do this better. But I think to say I'm a professional and this is an aspect of the work, then I am going to learn how to do this, and I will not know how to do it right away. And it will feel terrible in the beginning, but it will feel better. I've written, query letters that over time I start feeling better and better about reading them. So I think that was a great question, though, because I think there's a lot of people that don't realize, oh no, this is just part of the work. Most don't like it.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for managing time? Let's say someone is stressed about money, they have a day job, and this emotional work that goes into rewriting is just difficult. Just any tips for creating a good writing space at home and managing time?
Well, I'm the eldest of 9 children, so I never had any space or time. And now I live in a houseboat in one room and with a husband and a dog. So I write when I can, as often as I can, on the couch with things all over the place. Different people need different things, but I just discovered that it's not very formal for me.
And I try to write at the same time every day. For me, the time of day, the coffee, all the little rituals help me feel safe. And it's almost as if I have to get into a trance state. But I would say that for me, even if I could do a little bit, because I don't have much time, I have found that I can sometimes, if I have an appointment, and I sit down early in the morning with no expectation. I try to get up before my husband does, my best writing time. So then I'll be like groaning. I'll hear, oh my God, the bed. Oh my God, his footfall. Oh my God, I wish I could, but there's something about, for me, even a little bit of time early in the day, the same time every day is very good. That's just my particular way.
Well, I also have this wonderful friend, Peter Murphy, who does a big conference now, but the conference started off with him. He lives in the Jersey Shore, and on the off season in January, he would rent a hotel room for almost nothing, and for a weekend at a time. He was teaching full time, and that was all he had. And he did very well that way. And so, you can make your own little yaddo if you need to. And particularly if you want to revise a whole big piece, you really can't do it on the couch. It's hard to keep the concentration going, to see the whole of it. So you have to make your own sometimes.
You know what I wanted to say too before we end, that to me there's something, talking about acceptance, rejection, or to find some other way to term, when an editor passes on your work. There's something about, the spiritual value of writing and of creating art, making art, because art spoke to us and we want to speak in that language to others, that is beyond rejection and acceptance. And it's just so important, because the world responds to us in one way, 0, 1, yes, no. I think that there's something very illusory about that. I think that's why it's so wounding, because one is putting something out that it's sort of like, well, what is important to you in your life? We have this one life and we're creating the life. And to think of how can you make the happiest life for yourself, the most meaningful, even in a world where it's, rejection, acceptance. I just feel like that's the continual question that artists have to deal with ongoingly. And you never get, I thought you were going to get beyond this situation. That is the situation. That's what we live in. Do you agree, Terese?
Yes, I think you're so eloquent. I think that's perfect.
Well, this has been lovely. It's been an hour. We should stop now. But Bonnie and Terese, thank you so much. And thanks to the audience. It's been a great chat, great questions. And I think this has been helpful for so many people.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you all from the Authors Guild, and we'll see you another time. Everyone have a good day.